to the newest episode of Deliver More, where we talk Teflon coatings with the guys who know the most about everything. Today, we are excited to cover three major pieces that these two see all the time in shops across the country that are holding those shops back from application excellence and what to do about them. So, with me, of course, we have, as always, the educated, the eloquent, the effusive, the effortlessly good-looking Teflon coatings experts, although not in any legal sense of that word, Mike Patterson and Chris Lord, who we all know much better as Wolfy. Guys, say hello.
Hello, Francesca, Wolfie, and Teflon community at large. Hello.
Yeah, great to be back.
It's always good to see you guys and always good to have you on and sharing what you know. So let's not keep the people waiting and dive right in. I know in the last few months, maybe 6 months or so, you guys have been on the road a lot, seeing customers, going into shops, and some of the conversations and visits have kind of inspired this topic for this episode. Wolfie, can you tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. In our previous life, I mean, we always had some kind of training. We had I3 back in the day, and we even had spray training that we utilized. Our customers liked a lot, which was virtual. And then we developed a shop audit, which was more just kind of a walkthrough procedures and just kind of looking at opportunities where, they might be able to improve equipment or processes they do. And there's this void in training. It just seems like there's not a lot of opportunities out there. And our customers are reaching out asking us to come on site, but in a different capacity. Now it's like, I want you to come on site because I want you to look at how we're doing things, how we're processing, jobs. And, for Mike and I, we're not sprayers, but, we've been to a lot of shops. We have a lot of conversations with people, and first we're like a little bit nervous, like, gosh, I hope they don't ask us to spray anything type of response. But it's actually it's great for us. It's also great for them, for us to see how they do things, because we do see opportunity where they're maybe make some small tweaks or changes in how they do their operations, or how they're fixturing the parts, or how they treat the material before they even spray it. So there's so many different areas, and we get to see it all. And we're there for, like, I don't know, half a day, maybe even a full day if it's necessary. But what we do is, Mike and I kind of tag team it. We're there together. And this is their time. I mean, they've made the investment for us to come out. And we're like, listen, if you had questions or you had concerns about anything that you've been doing in the past, now's the time. I mean, your company has invested in us being here. So now's the time to just kind of, maybe change things or tweak things a little bit or ask questions. And it's, like I said, I think the sites that we've been to and the people we've worked with have been super receptive to it.
Yeah. I could kind of build on that, Francesca. One of the things that for my whole career, basically, I always love seeing people's shops, and a lot of customers are proud of their shops and will take you through, and you've been through yourself a number of shops, and it's really great to see what's going on. But the one thing we always notice is when you're going through the shops, like, everybody all of a sudden changes what they're doing because the boss is walking around or the owner's walking around, or, oh, here comes the Teflon guys.
Right.
And so all of a sudden everybody tightens up, and like maybe they're doing things like a little bit more by the book than how they really do them. So one of the things I think has really opened our eyes in the last year of spending considerable amount of time with people in their shops is that you can really let people let their guard down and show us what they're really doing without risk of getting in trouble or anything like that. So it's like a safe environment for them, and it's also good for us because now we see how people are really using the products, and that helps us be even more informed to make better observations and better recommendations.
That's really interesting. So you're saying, between the two of you, what I'm hearing is that, there have been many iterations. You've always seen the need and the benefits of training for coders in across a number of different positions that they're in a coating facility. But as you've grown and seen more, you notice that in the shop training offers this whole new kind of perspective where you get to see the bad habits potentially in person. You can see what is actually going on versus maybe the way somebody's telling you things are going on. And maybe the person you're getting the information from, like the owner or the boss, actually isn't in the shop that much.
Exactly.
So
Exactly.
all
Mhm.
of that has culminated into today's episode, which is basically what are those things you're seeing over and over and again that definitely need to be fixed? And you've seen them so much so that you think it's worth telling everybody to check these three things, right?
Correct. You got
Awesome. Okay, well then let's go. Mike,
it.
what is that
Mhm.
first thing that, is probably one of the most common mistakes that holds Teflon coating shops back from being really excellent?
I think one thing that it's kind of a double-edged sword almost, and a lot of shops have been around for decades, and a lot of them have very long-term people that work in their shops that have a significant amount of knowledge as far as the application, preparation, all that kind of stuff. Uh, what we see happening a lot is there will be one person that is almost the holder of all information and like the gatekeeper of all the nuances that come along with spraying these coatings, because this is a bit of a black art. So what we see a lot of is, one person that has everything, and if that person isn't there or that person's tied up doing another job, then the rest of the shop kind of comes to a screeching halt because everybody's standing around waiting for this person's input or this person's blessing on how they're going to approach the part. So it's something we see a lot of. It's understandable how it got to that, but it creates a number of different issues in the facility.
What's one of the major risks that is at play if you have just this kind of pinnacle of information and wisdom, but really no way to spread that out or you're not sharing it?
hmm Well, there's the efficiency one that I talked about as far as people waiting around for them. But I think the other part that comes out of this is it's almost like the procedures become a verbal passing down of like folklore almost.
Yeah, it's the
So
lore
they'll
of Teflon.
yeah, and they'll be like, oh, well, this is how we do this part. And if we start asking like, well, why do you do it that way? It's usually because somebody will quickly point the finger at someone else big because that's what he taught me. And then that person will say, well, that's because Jose taught me that or whatever it's going to be. And so
Right.
what we see happening is like what I think Chris and I have deemed as procedural drift. So if you look at like how it should be done and maybe how it was done 30 years ago or 20 years ago versus how it's done today, they're two drastically different things. It's almost like a game of Teflon coating telephone where it's just passed down and watered down and altered, and now it's kind of like, okay, how did we get here? And all right, let's do a hard reset and make
Yeah.
sure we're doing things right.
In a lot of cases, they don't know, Mike. I mean, it's just like, well, this is how he taught me how to do it, or this is what he said. Like, I never looked to actually look at a tech data sheet and make sure that we were doing things appropriately. It's just what I was told. And
Yep.
we have that whole like, we'll say like urban legend type of thing where it's like, oh yeah, you can't do two coats with this coating, and we're like, why not? Type of thing. And that's how the information's passed down. And it's just getting the day-to-day of production, people just trying to get work done. They don't question anything and just keep moving forward, unfortunately.
That
hmm
makes sense. And
It's kind of
so,
the fun part for us, Francesca, is just to ask why
yeah.
and try to understand how things got to where they are. And sometimes they have great answers, and it'd be because of X, Y, and Z. And you're like, okay, that makes sense. And so it's a good form for us to learn sometimes, but also I think more times than not is when we see like, all right, we have to get back to some basics and make sure things are clear and done the right way.
So, how do you prevent that from happening? If you're a coding shop and you have one guy that's holding all the knowledge, what should they do about that?
I think my suggestion for how to repair that sort of fix that sort of issue is to really have written procedures and documentation for how things should happen.
Mhm.
Because the shops that do have those detailed job riders that go around with the parts, they tend to have things pretty tight, pretty buttoned up, and there's not a whole lot of room for error, and there's a lot a lot of consistency, and those are, whether it's because of ISO or whatever other procedures they may have in place. But so I think that's the biggest fix for that, is just well documented procedures for everything. And so we're not just talking about put this coating on this part. It's how much do you thin? What spray nozzle should you use? What air pressure should you use? What's the cure cycle? Are you curing one part at a time or 100 parts at a time? So all those things really should be detailed in some sort of instructions that float around from department to department within the shop.
Yeah, that makes sense. Wolfie, anything to add on that? Any other tips for preventing or making sure that you're safe from, limited knowledge?
No, I think Mike hit it on the head there. He covered a lot of bases there. So I mean, I think there's really not much else to add other than just trying to disseminate that information, or at least have a place for it, a repository of some sort of how you're operating.
I like it. I like it a lot. Awesome. Okay. Well, Wolfie, then we're going to stick with you. If having, that one guy who knows all the information is one of the most common mistakes, tell me about another very common mistake that you see in most of the shops that's holding them back in a big way.
Sure, sure. Yeah. I mean, we talk about plan of attack a lot of times here, and that comes in many forms. I mean, it could be just, how you set up the material, or how you get started with your day, and or how you go about your day, but also like the jobs that are being presented that are in front of you. Like, how are you going back by effectively coding those pieces, and you know it, things aren't questioned a lot of times. A lot of these processes and things are inherited, and this is how the previous guy did it, so this is how I'm doing it. And you know things like what Mike said previously was like, I had never questioned like the nozzle that we were using or the air pressure that I'm using. I just use the same thing every time, and it's like
Yeah.
you could be wasting a boatload of time, a whole lot of material. And we definitely have seen that. You get run into like maybe coder fatigue because a part that really should be coated in one coat, guy wasn't trained very well, and or they always say like, oh, well, it has to be done in two coats. That's how he's doing it, and he's doing twice as much work just to complete the
Hmm.
job, and they make it so much harder. But again, it's not second guessed. It's just, this is what I inherited, and this is what I do, and there's so much to be gained by just kind of rethinking things sometimes.
So it sounds like almost this second most common problem, or one of the most common problems, is really almost a result of the first one. It's like this is what happens when all you have are the urban legends or the lore or the lack of kind of documented SOPs and detailed riders, is that you have no plan of attack. You have sort of a generic broad approach to all things without the nuance, without knowing why.
For
And
sure.
then
And those job
Yep.
riders are important, Francesca, for sure. And I'm glad you brought that up because those things, those follow the job. And sometimes job riders can be really, really generic. This is the coating. Here's the thickness, and that might be it.
go to
Cure it
town.
at, cure it at 500 degrees and move on. Where, well, then we see other shops who are super tight, know the material, where they, suggest nozzle size and set your air pressures at this. And there's way more information that they've pulled probably from our tech data sheets or just from experience to effectively coat the parts. So, but that job rider, it really is kind of like the Bible for that job as it flows through the shop for guys to follow it. But at the end of the day, I mean, sometimes things change, or people have adopted things that really aren't really good processes. Sometimes those job riders need to be checked. You got to take a look at them. Like, this is what we wrote down, 10 years ago. Have things changed since then? Has the cure changed, and we never noticed it, or we never changed it, or et cetera. So, those job riders are good, but again, they do need to be evaluated every now and then too, just to make sure you're doing it the appropriate way.
They're really only as good as they're up to date, is what it comes down
Right.
to.
Right. 100%.
So it's almost like the fix in the first one is to have these detailed job writers. The fix in the second one is have these detailed job writers and make sure that they're audited by an engaged management that knows to check in now and then and what to look for.
Yep.
Yep,
That's
absolutely. Yeah.
exactly right. I mean, sometimes we see owners that are probably the best sprayers in their whole facility because they've spent years out there spraying parts themselves. So, I always get a big kick out of when I'm taking a tour and the owner is like, "Hey," and he'll go and kind of, give somebody a tip or tweak something or question something because that means he is seeing everything that's going on in that shop from top to bottom. And that's to me is so impressive to see as opposed to the guys that really don't know what's happening in the shop, but that's not their job potentially.
Mm-hmm.
But, you see them both. And to me, it's very impressive when you see people adjusting the little things to make that little bit of extra difference in transfer efficiency or film build per coat or whatever it's going to be.
Right, because without that, then you have wasted time, wasted material, wasted energy, wasted resources, wasted
Right.
money, I'm sure,
Yeah,
in
this
the
stuff's
long
expensive.
run.
I mean,
Yeah, or
the
even
material's expensive, time's expensive, all that stuff comes into play. I mean, we're happy to ship more gallons, but we're also it warms our heart to be able to help people do a better job. And that's kind of I think for us, that's the rewarding part of doing these shop trips is we know we're going to help people have a better process by the time when we leave the door. Now,
yeah.
much like bar rescue, whether they stick with those suggestions or not, or go back to their old ways, like we don't know. But
Right, right.
we're not going in there screaming and blowing stuff up. But it's sort of similar.
But in essence, we're actually really protecting Teflon's reputation too, because we're
Mm-hmm.
making
Yep.
sure that people are doing things the best way and that they're putting great parts out there. Helps their reputation also. But we spent Mike a lot of years, and me a lot of years protecting Teflon's reputation with people that didn't do things appropriately and trying to bail out, of that situation to go back and check these processes and be like, dude, this is why it didn't work because
Mhm.
you did this, this, and this. If you do this better, you don't have to worry about it. You'll put a good part out there all the time.
That's great. I definitely have heard both of you guys say this before that in the end, if things go wrong, a, a lot of people kind of get a bad name. One is Teflon.
For
It
sure.
can get the bad name without actually having earned it because it's not being applied correctly. And the other, of course, is the coder could get a bad name because they're, again, not applying it to the optimized, in the optimized way or something.
Yeah,
So
right.
For sure.
Yep.
cool. Okay, that's great. So you got to have knowledge, but you got to make sure you share that knowledge in a detailed format. And you got to make sure you have an engaged, responsible management that understands this art and science of coding application. And you'll be 2/3 of the way there in terms of beating the most common mistakes and missteps that you see in shops. But there is a third piece. And I have heard you say that this mistake holds back about 90% of the customers that you've seen.
Hmm.
I know that
Maybe higher.
Teflon, what's that?
Maybe higher.
Maybe higher. Okay, we'll say minimum of 90%. So if you're not part of the 1%, we know that. You
Right.
Teflon boys don't cry, but I think any of the shops that you've seen have been not exactly just like heaven. So I want you to come close to me and share what has to be fixed so that Friday I'm in love with my coatings.
Oh, wow. All right. Francesca, this is one that when we pull up and we're in the parking lot, Chris and I know there's certain things to look for. And this last one is one that we will guarantee we're going to find some issues that we can resolve. So, and this comes down to the cure cycle. And it's of utter importance. This is paramount importance. I mean, there's really three elements to applying a coating: surface prep, spray, cure. So to not really nail the third one is really leaving a lot of chips on the table, and
For sure.
also it leaves a lot of performance on the table potentially too. So we talk about protecting the brand and the reputation of the coder and the coding. Yeah, this is super important because what we see a lot of is, this relates to number one and number two. It all kind of fits together, which is, oh, here's the part. I cure it for 15 minutes at this temperature and it should be good. And they're not thermocoupling, but it's just what's on the paper or what's been done in the past. And we see tons of issues with that, in that the oven load might not be the same. How many parts you're coating at once, as an example. The oven itself those things need to be calibrated on a regular basis. And I can guarantee you, if you have an oven that's 15 years old, it's not heating up the same way it did now as it did when that job writer was probably written. We see people curing parts of different sizes and weights and masses and geometries in the oven at the same time. So they may say, oh, it's the same coating, so we just cure them all at once. And like, that's not okay. So this really comes down to having a real understanding of the cure, and meaning the time the part is at the intended temperature, and understanding what that cure looks like in terms of a cure chart, and making sure that it has the right amount of dwell time at the target temperature. Because just having it on paper and having the oven setting, it's not really good enough. And so, using a laser isn't a great practice, because that
Yeah.
now you're opening the door, letting the volatiles out, letting the heat come out, and getting a temperature on one of the parts that's near the front, not the one that's in the back, but the one that's in the front. And then you see it short and you have to close it. Now the oven has to ramp back up. It's not a good practice. So we really always recommend you have to thermocouple to understand what that cure time and temperature should be, to make sure you're hitting the right target points. You don't have to do it every time. If you know you're doing a part and you're doing 10 of them at once, awesome. But as soon as you put 20 of those parts in there, you should thermocouple one of them to make sure
Right.
that you're getting the right adjustment to your cure. This in and of itself is the single biggest thing we see at every shop, everywhere we've gone for my whole damn career. I mean, I'm not, and those of you who've let me in your shop that we've talked about this, you know what I'm saying.
Right. No, for sure. I mean, we get those, even when we get the calls, Francesca, when we're not there, but people are calling us about, an error or problem or something that happened. We always say there's really, just a couple areas. It's like, how'd you set your material up, how'd you spray it, and how'd you cure it? And we can almost predict that the cure is going to be a time. It's, we put it in for an hour. And it's like, do you know what the cure cycle is for that material? And they really say they really don't in a lot of cases. And it's funny how you can do so many things right. And then the last thing, which is your biggest investment in your shop, which is your oven, your
Mm,
money maker,
yes.
you round edges. All of a sudden you start cutting corners and you're like, oh my God, why do you do that at the most critical part of the process?
Yeah. And here's two other things that people, just so people know what we're talking about too. It's rare that people overcure. I mean,
Right.
there's only one situation where I see people overcure, and that's when they have a timed oven that goes off in the middle of the night, a cure cycle that goes off, and they just leave the parts in there until they get in the morning, and now they've been subjected to temperatures above the melting point for too long. That's the only time we ever see it. If somebody's just doing parts in and out of the oven during the work shift, I've never seen anybody overcure. It's undercured 95% of the time, hands
That,
down.
that's true. That is very true.
How
So
can you
that's,
tell that it's undercured?
it's a little bit, it's not easy. The three coat reinforced is easy because it looks blue. Because
Okay.
Chris and I were at a shop within the last year, and they thought that's how the coating was supposed to look, because these guys have been undercuring for a decade probably.
Yeah.
And they were like, yeah, this
Oh.
is the normal look. And we were like, pop that thing back in the oven for another, let's go another 15 minutes and let's see how it looks. And it came out, it looked awesome. It was nice and black, shiny.
Mhm.
And they were like, whoa.
A whole new world. So
Yeah.
that's so interesting because even if it's undercured, I imagine like the properties will still perform to a degree. But what you lose is that the performance isn't in the way it's intended. It's not as slippery. It doesn't
Yeah.
adhere. It doesn't have slip or whatever it is. So you get enough, but you're not getting the maximum. And then that's not delivering really on a Teflon promise.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, you get the lack of smoothness and the coating could have a little bit of a texture or roughness, and you're like, it's not supposed to be that way. Um,
Yeah.
some things manifest down the line, where okay, it made it out of the shop and then it went into production and they had a failure almost immediately, or it lasted half as long as it used to, or it started peeling here, things like that, where maybe they didn't get the cross link with the primer and the top coat, things of that
A
nature.
lot
But
can happen.
yeah, yeah, for sure. So that's really what happens. It's great if we can catch it before it goes out the door so they can address it. But a lot of cases we're getting it after the fact, and they've got to do some, you know.
Damage control.
Recoat, yeah, damage control, exactly. Great term
Well,
for that.
it's one of those things that from the quality standpoint, people have a quality department and they're looking, and a lot of times what they're checking is, I want to see how thick the coating is. Fine. That's awesome. Shows your application was good. There's
Right.
very little you can do that will test to see if it's fully cured or not, because fully cured isn't a one or the other. It's partially cured, and it's gonna, if you do a hexadecane test, it's gonna beat up, and you're gonna make out fully cured. Nah, it's not. So it's the one area that is, unless you have a chart recorder that's hooked to a thermocouple that shows what temperature that part went to. That's the only way to tell that a part was cured properly. Anything else is going to be pretty subjective, and they have
Guesswork. Yeah.
all this great quality equipment, quality testing, quality procedures, people doing all this stuff, and the most important area they can't test for.
And then you're starting back at the beginning usually,
Hmm.
right?
Yeah.
So,
It's hard to
and
fix.
yeah, it's hard to fix, it's hard to identify, and that makes sense is why it's in such a high percentage of the shops. It's not really a failure of any person or any systems or any process or anything. It's really just a matter of mindfulness and kind of like the more artistic, kind of like critical thinking on the fly side of this whole job of applying coatings, correct?
Yeah, I mean, I mentioned about the application being the art of the coding part. I feel like the cure is the science, because
Mm,
that's where all the magic happens,
Right.
is during that cure cycle.
Right.
And so I feel like that's the part that really needs to be focused on a lot. And like I said, when we're in the parking lot, we know damn well that's like, we don't even go to the oven, because we know that's the slam dunk. We'll start elsewhere and work our way through the process, and then when we get there, we know we have a layup.
And that oven
X.
piece is controllable too. I mean, these things have controllers on them, and usually they have jobs that require their oven gets calibrated, so they have a calibration, schedule and things like that. It's just, people trying to rush to the end. And as we all always say in here, you can't rush a Teflon job. There are steps that have to be taken, and you have to follow them. You can't make things go faster. It's really hard.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Mhm.
All right, guys. Well, that's the three then. We've
There it
covered the
is.
three most egregious errors that you see in shops that hold people back. And it turns out they're pretty just natural kind of human behavior that
They
slips in.
are.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's great. I mean, it's about having information, having a plan of attack, and then curing. If we cover those three, most of the inefficiencies and mistakes can be thwarted, right? Let's
Yeah.
hope.
Yes.
All right. Well, if you are wondering how your shop measures up in these three key areas, then, get out there, take a look around. And if you're not sure what you're looking at or you're not liking what you're seeing, then you can always make some time in your calendar to schedule a shop training with these guys. You can call us, you can email, you can social comment and DM us and all the things. We are very available. These two, especially, they're here to help you, be better at your job so that Teflon can be better at its job. So don't be shy, ask questions, and please don't hesitate to give this episode a like, comment, or even subscribe on our YouTube page so that you don't miss more content like this. Right, guys?
You got it.
All
Well
right.
Absolutely.
said.
Cool. Well, I just have one more question for you, and it has nothing to do with these shops, actually.
Uh-huh.
But your visits may influence it. Would you rather live in a world where you have no heat or no air conditioning?
Jeez.
Wolfie?
No heat.
No heat. Wow, you bring the heat, I guess, so you don't need the heat brought to you.
Well, I mean, I can. Let's put it this way. I can put clothes on and things like that to counter not having heat. There's things I can do. If I don't have any air conditioning, I really have a lot of other ways to make myself cool down. Let's put it that way.
Okay, that's fair.
Go down to
Mike?
shirts and skins if we want, but
Mike, you looks like you're thinking you're
perplexed.
rethinking after hearing Wolfie's
Yeah, I
answer.
mean, because it sounds so soft, being like, "Oh, I have to have air conditioning." It's
Nobody's judging.
well, I was. I mean, but yeah, part of this is since we live in a 4-season place of Delaware,
Right.
I mean, it's been cold as all get out. So does no heat mean I can't build a fire in my fireplace?
No, it just means no heater.
Okay.
Ooh.
You live like log cabin times.
Yeah, I mean,
They
I
didn't have
think
either.
I think no heat is actually the one I would choose. Or I mean, the one I would want. I would want to have heat. I could ditch air conditioning because air conditioning is a nice to have. I mean, Delaware gets pretty hot, but you can find a way to cool down. There's a lot of people that don't have air conditioning. No heat, you might die. Like
Yeah.
it,
You might have heat stroke.
I mean, you can always go get in the water, do something. I can see Chris in the summertime when he gets hot. He starts walking around panting like his dogs.
They pan when it's cold out. I mean, tough question.
Francesca, what's your answer?
I would have to go. I can't live without heat. I feel like it would be really hard. I feel like I'm torn.
It's
This is
tough to
tough.
sleep in the summer when there's no air conditioning.
That's the thing. Is like I can't stand sweating, and I just it gets hot so fast, and then there's nothing you can do. And
You gotta go to
like,
your basement.
ugh, no, thank you.
Gotta
Yeah,
snuggle
I
up.
gotta.
Wintertime, you gotta
soft.
snuggle up.
Yeah, wintertime. No, I need my AC, I think. So I'm gonna keep my my first world air
My AC
conditioning.
too. That's right.
Right.
All right, guys. Well, thank you so much for joining us, and I hope you enjoyed it as much as we did. We always love talking and being together with you. We will be back for more with Mike and Wolfy from Delaware. Thanks, guys. Bye-bye.
Adios. See ya.